Clara Donovan had always believed in the life she shared with Ethan Whitaker. Their home was filled with laughter, the kind that made neighbors comment on how perfect they seemed together. Clara thought she knew him completely, trusted him without question, and gave her heart entirely to their marriage. But one rainy Tuesday evening, everything she believed came crashing down. She had returned home early from work, craving nothing more than a quiet night with Ethan. Instead, she found a message waiting on the kitchen counter, one that made her hands shake and her chest tighten. It was from someone named Madeline Cross, and it wasn't just a simple note. It carried the weight of betrayal. Clara read it over and over, trying to make sense of the words. Madeline was pregnant with Ethan's child. Clara felt a rush of emotions she didn't think she could survive all at once: shock, anger, heartbreak. Her mind raced as she pictured them together, all the hidden moments she never noticed. How could he? She had given him everything. Every ounce of trust, every late night spent comforting him when he had a bad day, every quiet morning breakfast where she hoped he felt loved. And he had thrown it all away for another woman, a stranger who had invaded her life with a single text. The betrayal cut so deep that Clara's chest hurt, as if someone had punched her repeatedly. She sank onto the couch, feeling the weight of disbelief crush her. This wasn't just cheating. This was a life-altering betrayal, one that changed everything she had planned, everything she had dreamed about with him. And yet, somewhere beneath the anger and the tears, a spark flickered. Clara realized that she wouldn't be the victim here. She couldn't let Ethan or Madeline or the situation define her. If he thought he could destroy her and move on without consequence, he was sorely mistaken. A plan began to form, small at first, then growing stronger as clarity replaced her confusion. She didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge. She wanted the truth to shine through, to show Ethan what his choices had cost him, and to reclaim the control he had so carelessly taken from her. While Clara wrestled with the storm inside her, Derek Langston had been a steady presence in her life. He had known her longer than most, seen her at her best and her worst, and quietly harbored feelings he never dared to share. When Clara called him that evening, her voice trembling, Derek didn't hesitate. He arrived at her door with a calm presence that anchored her chaotic emotions, his eyes reflecting concern and unwavering support. He listened as she recounted everything, as the anger and sorrow spilled out in waves, and he never interrupted, never judged. In that moment, Clara felt a glimmer of hope. Derek wasn't just a friend. He was someone who could stand with her, someone she could rely on in a world that suddenly seemed cruel and unrecognizable. By the end of the night, Clara's heartbreak had transformed into resolve. She would confront Ethan and Madeline on her terms, not in desperation, but with strength and composure. And she wouldn't face it alone. Derek would be by her side, a silent but powerful statement of support. She imagined the day she would walk into that gathering, heads turning, all eyes on her. Not as the woman betrayed and discarded, but as the one who had risen above it, carrying her dignity like armor. Clara allowed herself a small, defiant smile. The storm inside her had only begun, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not be broken, and when the time came, the truth would leave no doubt about who had been wronged. Clara sat alone in the quiet of her bedroom, memories flooding her mind like a river she hadn't expected. She remembered the early days with Ethan, how he would surprise her with flowers on random Tuesdays, the way he laughed at her silly jokes, and how their weekends were filled with long drives and late-night talks. She recalled their first apartment, cramped but full of warmth, and how they had painted the walls together, laughing when paint ended up on their clothes. Back then, everything had felt simple, honest, and full of promise. She had believed their love would carry them through anything, that they were a team, unshakable and true. But over the years, things had changed, almost imperceptibly at first. Ethan became quieter, more distracted. He spent more time at work or with friends Clara barely knew. Sometimes he would drift during conversations, nodding without really listening. He laughed less, smiled less. Clara had dismissed it as stress, believing in her heart that love could withstand anything. She had tried to reach him, to pull him back, to ask what was wrong, but each attempt had been met with vague reassurances that everything was fine. She had wanted to trust him, and so she ignored the tiny alarms her instincts had whispered. Then the evidence appeared, undeniable and cruel. Clara had found a small envelope tucked away in a drawer she rarely opened. Inside was a pregnancy test, the kind that showed 2 lines, and a folded note in a handwriting she didn't recognize at first. Her heart sank as she realized the note confirmed what she had feared. Madeline Cross was carrying Ethan's child. Clara's hands trembled as she held the pieces of proof, a pit forming in her stomach. Her mind reeled, trying to understand how her life had shifted so suddenly. She felt a flush of humiliation, as if her private life had been exposed to the world, even though only she knew. How could the man she loved betray her so completely? She questioned herself endlessly. Had she missed the signs? Was she not enough? Tears came, but they were not enough to wash away the shock and hurt. Clara felt a sharp, piercing heartbreak, a sense of loss that seemed impossible to measure. She had poured everything into her marriage, her time, her love, her hopes for the future, and now it felt like sand slipping through her fingers. But beneath the grief and the sting of betrayal, a quiet resolve began to form. She would not let this define her. She would not crumble under the weight of Ethan's choices or Madeline's intrusion into her life. Clara's thoughts sharpened into clarity. This was not about vengeance for its own sake. This was about reclaiming what was hers, her dignity, her self-respect, her sense of self-worth. She would face the betrayal with strength, not malice, and she would make sure that Ethan understood the consequences of his actions. A vow settled deep in her chest. She would rise above the humiliation, not as a victim, but as a woman who refused to be broken. Clara wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders. She would take back control of her life, and she would do it on her terms, with truth and courage guiding every step. Clara didn't know where to turn with the storm raging inside her, so she called her sister, Jocelyn Harper. Jocelyn had always been the steady voice in Clara's life, the one who could see through the noise and offer guidance without judgment. When Clara met her at the small cafe down the street, she could barely hold herself together. Her hands shook slightly as she recounted every detail: the messages, the pregnancy, the betrayal she never imagined. Jocelyn listened quietly, her eyes darkening with concern as she reached across the table to squeeze Clara's hand. "You have to be careful," Jocelyn said softly but firmly. "Ethan isn't just lying to you. He's trying to manipulate everything. Don't let anger or sadness make you act too quickly. Think, plan, and protect yourself first." Clara nodded, taking in her sister's words. They were a balm to her frayed nerves, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this mess. But even as Jocelyn's caution settled over her, Clara could feel a fire growing in her chest. She wouldn't let fear stop her from standing tall. When Clara returned home that evening, Ethan was there, waiting with a rehearsed look of remorse. He approached her slowly, his voice soft and apologetic. "Clara, I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he said. "You have to understand, it just happened. I didn't think about the consequences." Clara's eyes narrowed as she studied him. She had heard these words before, from other friends who had been cheated on, from movies, from the quiet stories of women who thought apologies could undo betrayal. But she wasn't fooled. Every excuse, every attempt to justify his actions, only made the hurt sharper. Ethan expected her to accept it, to forgive and move on, but Clara saw clearly that nothing could erase what he had done. After that confrontation, Clara started spending more time with Derek Langston. He didn't press her, didn't try to convince her of anything. He simply listened, offered quiet encouragement, and let her speak when she needed to. With Derek, Clara could let her walls down just enough to breathe, to feel safe with someone who understood her pain without judgment. They would walk in the evenings, talking about small things, sharing memories from work or childhood, and gradually the heavy weight of betrayal became a little easier to bear. Over time, their friendship deepened in a way Clara hadn't expected. Derek's presence wasn't just comforting, it was grounding. He reminded her of who she was beyond the hurt, of her strength and worth. And slowly, she realized that their connection was more than friendship. It was a quiet, growing bond that offered not just support, but a sense of partnership. She began to see that with Derek by her side, she could confront Ethan and Madeline with clarity and courage, not desperation. The idea of facing the truth with someone who truly had her back made her feel more powerful than she had since discovering the betrayal. In Derek, she found not just comfort, but an ally, someone who would stand beside her when she decided it was time to reclaim her life. Clara couldn't stop thinking about the way Ethan had been slipping away from her, and now she realized Madeline was trying to push him completely out of her life. A neighbor had casually mentioned seeing Ethan and Madeline together at a cafe, and Madeline had been speaking about their future family, as if Clara didn't exist. That knowledge hit Clara hard, but it also sharpened her focus. She understood that if she wanted to protect herself and her dignity, she couldn't let this happen quietly. She needed a plan, one that would show Ethan and Madeline exactly what their choices had cost them. Clara spent hours thinking through what to do. She wanted to confront them, but not in anger or chaos. She wanted the moment to be controlled, precise, and unforgettable. Her mind went over every detail, where, when, and how she could make the truth undeniable. She knew a public scene would backfire. This had to be private enough to be effective, but dramatic enough to make them feel the weight of their actions. It had to be a moment that marked a turning point, not just for her, but for everyone involved, especially Ethan. Derek became her anchor in this planning. He didn't try to take control or offer advice she hadn't asked for. Instead, he listened, helped her think through each step, and asked questions that made Clara see holes in her plan she hadn't considered. They discussed timing, who should be present, and how to reveal the truth without losing her composure. Slowly, a strategy began to form. They decided the private dinner Ethan had been organizing to announce his new family would be the perfect opportunity. Everyone would be gathered, Madeline would be confident and smug, and Ethan would feel assured he had the upper hand. It was the moment Clara needed to take control. Together, Clara and Derek rehearsed the reveal. Derek suggested subtle ways for her to make the evidence undeniable without making it a screaming confrontation. They talked about tone, about pacing, and about the emotional weight of every word. Derek reminded her to focus on what mattered most: the truth, her dignity, and the reality of the betrayal, not just anger or spite. Clara felt a sense of calm confidence she hadn't had since discovering the affair. She realized that the plan was as much about reclaiming her life as it was about exposing theirs. As the day of the dinner approached, Clara felt a mixture of nerves and determination. She imagined walking into the room with Derek by her side, everyone's attention turning to her, the quiet intensity of her presence cutting through the casual chatter. She would reveal not only the lies and deceit, but the emotional truth, the way Ethan had hurt her, the way he had risked their entire life together, and the consequences of choosing Madeline over her. That thought gave her strength. Clara knew this confrontation would change everything. It wouldn't just be about betrayal. It would be about clarity, honesty, and finally, reclaiming control over her life. She felt ready to face them both, ready to stand tall, and ready to make sure the truth could no longer be ignored. Clara knew that words alone wouldn't make Ethan or Madeline understand the depth of their betrayal. She needed proof, undeniable evidence that would leave no room for excuses. Over the next few days, she quietly began gathering everything she could find. She collected text messages between Ethan and Madeline, each one more painful than the last, showing the casual way he had lied and deceived her. She found receipts from dinners, gifts, and trips he had taken without mentioning, all paid for with money she had thought went toward their life together. Every little detail she uncovered made her heart ache, but it also strengthened her resolve. The process wasn't easy. Every new piece of evidence stirred a storm of emotions inside her. Anger bubbled up suddenly, sharp and hot, making her hands tremble and her chest tight. She wanted to lash out, to confront Ethan immediately, but she held herself back. She reminded herself that this wasn't about a moment of revenge. It was about closure and reclaiming control. The desire for calm, for dignity, fought against the raw, fiery anger she felt. Sometimes she sat in silence, staring at the messages or receipts, feeling tears rise, but also feeling the power of knowing the truth. Derek was her anchor through it all. He never judged her emotions or tried to rush her decisions. Instead, he helped her stay focused, reminding her of the bigger plan. He suggested ways to organize the evidence so it would be clear and undeniable, and he quietly encouraged her to take breaks when the anger became overwhelming. Derek's calm presence allowed Clara to channel her energy into preparation rather than letting it consume her. She began to trust that with him by her side, she could face Ethan and Madeline without losing control. While Clara was preparing, Ethan remained completely unaware of her actions. He went about his days with a smug sense of confidence, convinced that Madeline's pregnancy gave him the upper hand. He spoke casually to neighbors and friends about his new family, never suspecting that Clara was quietly building a case that would expose every lie. That arrogance made Clara's determination even stronger. She realized how careless he had been, how easily she could use his confidence against him in the moment when the truth came out. The tension in Clara's life grew as the evidence piled up. Every text, every receipt, every whispered confirmation from friends or witnesses who knew something was wrong added another layer of certainty to her plan. She could feel the anticipation building, a tight coil in her stomach that mingled fear with a strange thrill. She knew that the confrontation would be intense, emotional, and unforgettable, but the proof she was gathering made her feel ready. Clara understood that the time for passive hurt had passed. With Derek's steady support and the evidence in her hands, she was preparing to show Ethan and Madeline the full reality of their choices, and nothing would allow them to escape it. Clara decided it was time to face Ethan alone. She invited him to the small study in their home, a place where they had shared quiet moments over the years. As he entered, he wore a look of casual confidence, as if nothing had changed, as if she was overreacting. But Clara didn't waver. She held the stack of messages, receipts, and notes tightly in her hands, feeling the weight of every betrayal she had uncovered. "Ethan," she said quietly but firmly, "I know everything." Her voice was steady, carrying the power of truth. The calmness in her tone contrasted sharply with the storm of emotion she felt inside. She laid the evidence on the desk between them, sliding the texts and receipts toward him. "I have every message, every dinner, every trip you tried to hide. I know about Madeline, and I know about the baby." Ethan froze, a flash of panic crossing his face before he quickly masked it with anger. "Clara, you don't understand. You're blowing this out of proportion," he said, his voice rising. "Madeline and it's complicated. I never meant to hurt you." His eyes searched hers, trying to gauge if she would crumble under his manipulation, if she would forgive him because of his excuses. Clara looked directly at him, refusing to flinch. "Complicated?" she asked, her voice calm but cutting. "You think that word covers months of lies, of betrayal, of disrespect? I am not going to let you humiliate me. Not here, not anywhere." She could see his confidence faltering, a flicker of something dangerous and desperate in his eyes, but she stayed composed. Her body remained upright, her hands steady. She had felt so powerless when she first discovered the affair, but now she realized she had the control. She was no longer the wife hiding in pain. She was a woman standing on solid ground, armed with truth and clarity. Ethan tried again, softer this time, with the familiar tones of charm he had once used to disarm her. "Clara, I'm sorry. We can fix this. Don't make it worse than it is. You don't need to." "No," Clara interrupted, her voice firm, slicing through his words. "I don't need more excuses. I don't need apologies. I need honesty, and I will make sure everyone sees the truth. You thought you could humiliate me in private and keep your life with her intact. That ends now." Her eyes held his, unwavering, and she could see the realization settling in. He had misjudged her, underestimated her. She stood for a moment longer, letting the weight of her presence sink in, letting him feel the certainty that nothing he said or did could break her now. Then she turned and walked out, leaving Ethan in the study, staring at the evidence and at the woman who had once been so vulnerable but was now entirely in control. In that quiet moment, Clara knew the private confrontation was only the beginning. The real reckoning would happen at the dinner, where everyone would witness the full truth. And when that moment came, there would be no excuses, no lies, and no escape. Clara spent the evening pacing in her bedroom, her mind running through every detail of the dinner. She held Derek's hand tightly as they rehearsed her entrance, practicing the way she would walk in, the words she would say, and the calm, unwavering tone she would use. Derek watched her closely, offering quiet guidance and subtle suggestions. "Just speak the truth," he said softly. "Let them feel the reality, but don't let anger control you. Your strength will be enough." Clara nodded, grateful for his steady presence. With him by her side, she felt more prepared than she had in weeks. As she rehearsed, memories of her life with Ethan kept surfacing. She remembered the nights they had stayed up talking about their dreams, the quiet weekends in their small cabin by the lake, and the laughter they shared over inside jokes no one else could understand. Those moments made her chest ache, but they also made her resolve stronger. She realized that the grief she carried wasn't just about betrayal. It was about losing a life she had thought was secure, losing the man she had loved. Clara let herself feel it fully, letting the tears come silently, knowing that this emotional honesty would make her confrontation more powerful. Derek never tried to push her through the sadness. Instead, he reminded her of the bigger picture. "Clara," he said gently, "this isn't about revenge. It's about dignity. You deserve to stand tall, no matter what Ethan or Madeline think. Your truth is your power." His words resonated deeply. For the first time in days, Clara felt a sense of calm confidence settling over her. She realized that the strength she had been building wasn't just for the dinner. It was for herself, to reclaim her life from the chaos and betrayal. Meanwhile, Madeline had started acting as if everything was under control. She had noticed Clara's quieter presence at home, and a faint suspicion lingered in her mind. She wondered if Clara might make a scene, but she quickly dismissed the thought, convinced that Ethan's loyalty and the pregnancy gave them the advantage. That underestimation worked in Clara's favor, feeding the anticipation building inside her. The night before the dinner, Clara sat quietly with Derek, visualizing the moment when she would walk into the room. She imagined everyone's eyes turning toward her, Madeline's confident smile faltering, and Ethan realizing that control had slipped from his hands. She focused on every word she would say, the pauses she would take, and the calm intensity she would carry. Derek squeezed her hand, silently offering reassurance. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the mix of grief, anger, and clarity that had been simmering for weeks. She knew she was ready. The memories of love with Ethan, the pain of betrayal, and the presence of someone who truly supported her had all combined into a quiet, powerful strength. She would enter that dinner not as a broken woman, but as someone in full command of her truth, ready for the reckoning that would finally expose the reality Ethan and Madeline had tried to hide. The evening of the dinner arrived, and Clara felt a steady calm as she stood outside the door. Derek was by her side, his presence quiet but strong, giving her a sense of support she hadn't realized she needed so deeply. She adjusted her posture, took a deep breath, and stepped into the room. The atmosphere was warm and polite, with soft laughter and the clinking of glasses, but Clara felt the tension building in her chest. She could see Ethan across the room, smiling confidently as if the night was already won, and Madeline glowing with excitement, talking about their new family. Ethan approached the gathered guests, raising his glass. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, his voice filled with pride. "I want to introduce Madeline and our little one on the way. It's been an exciting time, and we wanted to share it with you." He looked at Clara with a faint, dismissive smile, certain she would stay silent, certain she would let him control the narrative. Clara stayed quiet for a moment, letting the room settle around her presence. Then, in a calm and steady voice, she said, "Ethan, Madeline, I think everyone deserves to know the full story." She held up the stack of evidence she had prepared, placing it carefully on the table. "These are messages, receipts, and confirmations that show the truth. Truth about lies, manipulation, and the choices you've made that have hurt not just me, but everyone around you who trusted you." The room went silent. Guests shifted uneasily as they leaned in, curious and shocked. Madeline's smile faltered, and Ethan's confident posture stiffened, his eyes widening in disbelief. Clara continued, her voice calm but powerful. "You thought you could humiliate me privately and control the narrative publicly. You underestimated me. And I'm not here to beg or plead. I'm here to show reality, your reality, and the consequences of betraying trust." Derek stepped forward slightly, a subtle but unmistakable sign of his support. Clara felt the power of his presence behind her, the quiet strength reinforcing every word she spoke. It was more than just evidence on paper. It was a declaration that she was no longer vulnerable, that she was fully supported, and that she had regained control of her life. The room's energy shifted, and all eyes were on Ethan and Madeline, who could no longer maintain their confident facade. Ethan tried to speak, his voice shaky. "Clara?" "Aye." Clara held up a hand to stop him. "No more lies. No more excuses. The truth is here, and everyone sees it now." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of friends and family who had known her and had quietly suspected something was wrong. Their silent support added to the weight of her words. Madeline's expression changed from confidence to shock, and Ethan's face showed guilt, shame, and the realization that control had completely slipped from his hands. Clara felt a mix of sadness and liberation. She had shown the truth calmly, powerfully, and with dignity. The revelation had landed, and the evening had shifted irrevocably. She had reclaimed her voice, her presence, and her strength, and there was no turning back. The room felt heavy with silence after Clara revealed the truth. Ethan and Madeline stood frozen, their confident expressions replaced by shock and embarrassment. The guests whispered among themselves, exchanging looks that spoke louder than words. Clara could see it clearly. Their carefully built image of control and happiness had crumbled in front of everyone. For the first time, Ethan's arrogance had no defense, and Madeline's smugness had vanished entirely. They were exposed, isolated, and powerless to repair the damage that had been laid bare. Clara felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. relief that the truth was finally out, that the lies could no longer hurt her. Sorrow for the life she had thought she shared with Ethan, now revealed to have been built on deceit. But beneath it all, she felt a sense of emotional closure. She no longer needed Ethan's approval, his love, or even his presence in her life. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also shown her how strong she could be when faced with it. Derek remained quietly by her side, his support unwavering. After the dinner, as the guests left and the room emptied, Clara and Derek found themselves alone. There was no need for dramatic gestures or confessions, just a simple understanding that they were now both part of each other's journey. Derek's loyalty and quiet strength had always been there, but now it was clear that they could explore a relationship built on honesty, trust, and mutual respect, without the shadows of betrayal hanging over them. Clara felt warmth in her chest, not just from the beginning of something new, but from the certainty that she could rely on someone who truly valued her. In the days that followed, Clara reflected on everything she had endured. The heartbreak, the humiliation, and the rage had been intense, but they had also revealed her resilience. She had faced Ethan privately, planned carefully with Derek, and confronted the truth publicly without losing her dignity. That strength, she realized, was hers to keep forever. The betrayal had not destroyed her. It had shaped her, sharpened her, and made her more aware of her own worth. She no longer feared being alone or being deceived. She had the tools to protect herself and the courage to demand respect in any relationship. Clara's growth became apparent in small, quiet ways. She walked taller, smiled more freely, and no longer allowed old fears to cloud her judgment. Derek and she spent time together, slowly building a connection grounded in trust rather than infatuation. Every laugh they shared, every quiet conversation, reminded her that life could still be beautiful even after the deepest wounds. And though Ethan and Madeline faded from her life, their memory no longer held power. Clara's heart had healed, and with each passing day, she embraced her independence, her strength, and the new chapter ahead. She realized that the most important truth she had uncovered was not about betrayal. It was about herself. She was no longer defined by what others had done to her, but by how she had chosen to rise above it. And in that choice, Clara found freedom, dignity, and the possibility of real love with someone who truly deserved her. Months had passed since the dramatic dinner that changed everything. Clara had moved forward, slowly but steadily, rebuilding her life on her own terms. The sadness and anger that had once consumed her had softened into lessons learned, and she felt a quiet confidence she hadn't known before. She had rented a small apartment near the city, filled it with the things she loved, and began to focus on her own goals and passions. Each day reminded her that she no longer needed Ethan or the false security he represented. Ethan and Madeline had faded from her life completely. Friends and acquaintances who had witnessed the truth at the dinner kept their distance from them afterward, and the isolation they now faced was a direct result of their choices. Clara no longer dwelled on their actions or allowed herself to be pulled back into the bitterness of what had happened. Instead, she focused on the future she was creating, one built on honesty, respect, and her own independence. Derek remained a steady presence, though Clara had no desire to rush anything. Their relationship grew naturally, founded on trust and shared understanding rather than excitement alone. They would meet for quiet dinners, take walks in the park, and talk for hours about dreams, fears, and everyday life. Derek never tried to fill the void of the past or rush her into decisions. He simply offered support and companionship, and in that, Clara found a love that felt safe and real. Her personal growth became her most noticeable change. She had learned to trust herself first, to set boundaries, and to recognize what she deserved in life and in love. Betrayal had once felt like a shattering force, but now she realized it had been a catalyst for transformation. Each choice she made, each step she took without fear, reinforced her independence and dignity. Clara had discovered that facing pain with clarity and composure could turn even the deepest hurt into strength. As the seasons changed, Clara often reflected on the past, not with bitterness but with perspective. She thought about how easily one could be deceived and how painful it was to confront the truth. But she also understood that her dignity and courage had carried her through the worst of it. The betrayal that had once threatened to define her had instead become a story of triumph and self-discovery. In the quiet moments of her life, she smiled at the resilience she had found within herself. She knew that while betrayal could hurt deeply, facing it head-on with calm, thoughtful courage could turn the pain into personal victory. Clara's life was no longer about loss or humiliation. It was about freedom, empowerment, and the ability to trust and love again on her own terms. She had reclaimed her story, and in that reclamation, she had found a sense of justice that was quiet, satisfying, and entirely her own. Clara's journey ended not with revenge or lingering anger, but with a bittersweet victory, a life rebuilt, a heart healed, and the knowledge that she could face whatever came next with unwavering strength and dignity.